Hey guys, so doing my devotions this morning, and something had really kind of stood out to me that I just felt like God wanted me to share with y'all. So I told you guys that I would, and now I am. We're going to talk about keeping God as the central focus of our life. This is critically important because it has to do with where our heart goes. One of the things that Paul talks about in Romans 12 is presenting ourselves as a living sacrifice. He talks about this in Romans 12:1. He says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. One of the things that we want to kind of keep first and foremost in our mind is that this is what Jesus did. Jesus presented his body. Jesus said, not my will, but thy will be done. He didn't look at his desires and the things that he wanted to do kind of in a fleshly sense as being the central focus of his life. Jesus came and he said, I'm giving my body to God for his purpose, for his to accomplish his will. So, and we're told to do the same things here in Romans 12. He says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. As we start looking at this, as we start saying, not my will, but thy will be done, one of the things that we see here is that in verse 2, we see that our minds begin to become transformed. We begin to continue to seek after his will. We begin to think differently, and the central focus of our life starts to become something other than our own personal desires, and so on and so forth. So if we continue on with this train of thought, one of the things that we're going to see is that the reason for this is that seeking after our own will end in our ultimate demise. We understand that when God gives us commands, that these commands are not things that we're being told to hurt us or to hinder us or hold us back or anything like that. These are things that we're being told for our own good. And one of the things that we're told in Romans 8 is, in Romans 8:6 is, for to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. So seeking after our own will, seeking after the things of the flesh, seeking after our own personal fleshly carnal desires are, as the central focus of our life, is something that is ultimately going to lead to our death. One of the things that we see as we go on looking at this passage in verse 9, he says, in verse 7 he says, but the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it cannot be subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. So we want to see that, or we want to kind of understand here, that to continue to seek after our own personal desires, our own pursuits, our own will, to seek that gratification, that self-gratification as being the central focus of our life, whatever that happens to be, is ultimately going to lead to our death. And when he's talking about that, he's talking about spiritual death. If we go on and we look at 2 Corinthians 10, how are we supposed to go on doing this? Well, we go on, there's a battle that's going on in our minds every single day. It's a battle that rages in our hearts to continue to draw us off track, to continue to get us to chase after the American dream or whatever country you're at, to continue to get us to chase after the things of this world, our own personal desires and so on and so forth. And we see in 2 Corinthians 10, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God. I want you to kind of focus on that. Casting down the imaginations, talking about the thought life, talking about the things that go on in our minds and in our hearts, casting those things down, and every high thing, anything that competes with our thoughts, competes with our heart, competes with God for a place in our minds, which is supposed to be being renewed and is supposed to be chasing after the things of of the Spirit versus the things of the flesh, casting all those things down. Get rid of it. Don't play with it. Don't tempt yourself with it. Don't continue to indulge in it. Whatever that is, so that it happens to be. Sometimes these things are not in and of themselves sinful. There's nothing wrong with you owning a house. There's nothing wrong with you owning a car. But when your life's pursuit starts to become getting that next car, getting that next house, then it starts to become something that is competing against God for that place in your heart. And he's very clear here in 2 Corinthians. You need to cast those things down. Jesus said that if your right hand offends you, cut it off. That was an analogy for this whole thing about things that compete against God for a place in our hearts. There's nothing wrong with family. There's nothing wrong with patriotism. But when it starts to become something that becomes the central focus of your life and starts to compete against God for that place in your heart, you need to destroy that idol. Because Jesus was very clear. It's a lot better that you go through life with one arm than it is to be cast into hell. It's a lot better that you not have that house, that you sell that house, sell that car, that you maybe even separate yourself from some relationships that are competing in your heart with God. Maybe it's better that you do that than to continue to drift away from God and basically have it be revealed that your heart was never really there to begin with. So to continue on in that verse, he says, and bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. So casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Our thought life is where a lot of these things take place. Jesus made it clear that it's not the guy who goes and commits the act of adultery. It's the guy who had those thoughts in his heart to begin with. Jesus, when he came, and we talk about how he abolished the law, Jesus didn't lower the bar in doing so. He raised it. He made it clear to the Pharisees that it's not just, you're not just morally impure, to use a friend of mine's phrase. You're not just morally impure when you commit the act of adultery. You become morally impure when you start to entertain those thoughts, when you start to rationalize it, because the ultimate end of that is the act of adultery or theft or idolatry or whatever it is it happens to be. It all starts in our thoughts. So how do we go about doing this then? Well, in Philippians 4 he says, finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. One of the things that he tells us here is to go on the offensive. All right, we want to compete, or we want to keep our thoughts and our hearts focused on God, and in doing so, what it means is that we need to go on the offensive for focus in our mind. Essentially, I want to go on the offensive and make sure that my thought life is focused on God at all times. And there's different ways that you can do this. Number one, go to church. I know that some people have this kind of antithetical view of church and so on and so forth, but understand that church is there for a reason. Church is there because it's a place where other believers gather together, and you guys are all supposed to be on the same page with Christ as your central focus. If you're going and you're kind of, I don't want to go to church and, I'm just going to do my own thing here, me and Jesus, understand that that's not how we're designed to be. Jesus referred to us as, Paul referred to us as a body of Christ. He referred to us as a temple being built. And the idea being is that we all make up different parts. We all complement each other with Christ as the head. We were designed to be in fellowship with one another, all focused on Christ, which is one of the reasons why marriage becomes a picture of our relationship with Christ, because it's not just me and my wife trying to draw nearer to each other. It's me and my wife staying focused on God, and as we stay focused on God, we do draw nearer to one another. So we want to make sure that our thought life is focused on the things that are good. And I'm not just talking about positive thinking. I'm talking about the things that are good in the sense that they are spiritually minded. They keep us focused on Him and keep us driving forward, and they keep our mind renewed. The other thing that we can do is that we can set our affections on the things above. So Colossians 3, he tells us, set your affections on things above, not on things of the earth. This is critically important too, because as we sit there and we see the great things that God blesses us with, it's very, very easy to get caught up in, well, my business is growing and I'm focused on the blessing instead of the blesser. I had a great deal, and I got paid a great commission check, and I get focused on what I'm going to do with that money. And we have to kind of keep in mind that our affections are being competed for on a daily basis, and he tells us, set your affections on the things above. If God blesses you with things, great. Understand that those things are for you to be able to utilize and bless others. Doesn't mean that you can't enjoy it, but when that enjoyment becomes the central focus of your life, you're running the risk of falling off into idolatry and adultery. So adultery in the sense of our relationship with Christ, that we cheat on Him essentially by allowing other things to get our affections instead of Him. Again, that God needs to be the central focus of our life. If something else is competing with it, get rid of it. Keep our minds focused on the things above. Set our hearts on the things above. Continue to pursue after those things. And in doing so, we'll continue to walk after the Spirit, and our mind will continue to become renewed in doing so. So, wanted to kind of pass that on to you guys. It was something that really stood out to me. Hope it makes you pause and take a second and think about it. You guys look up those verses and let me know what your thoughts are.